And we're good, Rob.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Synergy session, the Northern Coalition Model, Reinvesting Fishery Profits for Economic and Social Development. My name is Rob Greenwood. I'm Director of the Harris Center at Memorial University, as well as serving as Associate Vice President, Public Engagement and External Relations. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located this afternoon, and to consider the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. With today's session, we are going to revisit a theme we have not been discussing lately at the Harris Center, the fisheries, although we've done lots over the years through our brokering activities with faculty researchers and through the work of our professional associates. The Harris Center occasionally conducts significant studies on issues of importance to the province. Our involvement with fisheries issues dates back to the very beginning of the Harris Center. In fact, our very first Memorial Presents was Alastair O'Rielly in New West Valley, presenting on the fishery. Dave Vardy's presentation on provincial fisheries in 2007 was a key one for us. Research we funded through our Applied Research Fund. Paul Foley at our Grenfell campus on the shrimp industry. Also funded Emily Thomas, Kelly Vaden, and Ratana Chuampunje with their work on fishing policies and island development. So fisheries has been a constant issue for us throughout the 17 years of the Harris Center. And so we were very pleased when the Northern Coalition group of companies approached us to help them understand the impact their particular model of fishing industry organization has on the communities they live and work in. We have done many sessions with the Labrador Fishermen's Union Shrimp Company and Torngat. A lot of our work is always centered on controversial issues in the province. And we really are all about the integrity and independence of the university. And I think the Northern Coalition knew that when they came to us. And we were able to draw on the expertise we have, but also live up to that brand. Dr. Keith Storey, who has been involved with the Harris Center from the beginning. At the time, he was head of the Geography Department of Memorial. Dr. Storey is a Harris Center associate, and he led the research for this project on the Northern Coalition. We have 4 panelists today, including Dr. Storey, who is now an honorary research professor in the Department of Geography at Memorial. His background is in economic geography, and his main interests are in the community and regional development impacts of resource development in remote areas. Most of his work up till now has been on the impacts of activities in the oil and gas and mining sectors. And so this fishery-related project has provided the opportunity to look at resource development from a number of quite different perspectives. He is principal author of the Northern Coalition study. Alastair O'Rielly has served as the Executive Director of the Northern Coalition Corporation since January 2017. His fisheries career includes positions as Deputy Minister of the Newfoundland and Labrador Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture, President of the Fisheries Association of Newfoundland and Labrador, and at different intervals as Chair and as Managing Director of the Canadian Centre for Fisheries Innovation. He has served on numerous private and public sector boards, and is the current chair of the Board of Governors of the College of the North Atlantic. Keith Watts serves as the General Manager of Torngat Fish Producers Cooperative Society Limited, a position he has held for the past 17 years. And Jerry Ward has been in the seafood industry for over 40 years, holding senior management positions in both Canada and the US. From 2001 to 2014, he served as Chief Executive Officer of the Baffin Fisheries Coalition in Iqaluit, Nunavut. And since 2015, he's been Director of Fisheries with Qikiqtaaluk Corporation, an Inuit birthright company located in Iqaluit, Nunavut. He has also served a stint as Assistant Deputy Minister of Fisheries for the provincial government in Newfoundland and Labrador. So an amazing wealth of knowledge and expertise on our panel. We've carved out an hour or so for today's session. We'd like to keep it as conversational as we can. I'll start off with a round of questions for the panelists, but then we'll open it up to questions for you in the audience. You can submit a question at any time using the Q&A function. Boyan first will be keeping track of those questions, and when it comes time, he'll be asking them for us. Now, with all the housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to start with Alastair. In terms of the Northern Coalition, it is an interesting organization, Alastair. Can you give us a bit of a background on the coalition, where it is located, how it is structured, what does it do?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Rob, for that introductory question. I have my background here, which helps me respond to that question, and this actually shows in the territory that's covered by the membership of the Northern Coalition. And so it's an organization, an alliance of, really there's 5 corporate entities. There's a different number of licenses and so on, but there's really 5 corporate entities when you consider the multiplicity of licenses and so on. So within the Nunavut region, Kikatali Corp is there. In Northern Quebec, in Nunavik, Nakavik Corporation is a member. In Nunatsiavut, we have the Nunatsiavut group of companies and Torngat, that's represented by Keith this afternoon rather. And in Southern Labrador, the Labrador Fishermen's Union Shrimp Company. So these are the members. They formed this alliance back in 1996, and it was formed at a time when there was a significant growth in shrimp stocks and opportunities for increased access. And so the commonality of interest among all these folks was to represent their respective regions and seek additional access to the growth in the stocks, and they were successful at doing that. And that's almost 25 years ago now. It will be 25 years at the end of this year that the entity has been in place. So it's a not-for-profit corporation, federally incorporated, and its governance is driven by the number of licenses and the sharing of licenses. So it's pretty much equitable across the spectrum. So that's about as much as I think I want to say about it in general sense. You can see there's a lot of area. There's 52 communities that are part of all these regions. They're predominantly Inuit, almost exclusively. There are some 40,000 people that are beneficiaries of the fishing activities, directly or indirectly associated with these companies. So I'll stop there at a high level. I will say that there's a web page, northerncoalition.ca, that gives a fairly detailed description of each of the firms and of the organization, which for those that have an interest in delving a little deeper, they could do so. And of course, Dr. Storey's report also provides a pretty thorough description of the coalition. So I'll just give my thumbnail description for now and stop there. Thank you.
Super, thanks, Alastair. So Keith Storey, we have 2 Keiths on our panel, so I'll use last names when I need to. Keith Storey, you have taken a pretty thorough look at the Northern Coalition with fresh eyes. What are some of the key findings when you look at them as an organization? Oh, I think you're muted there, Keith.
Beg your pardon? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Loud and clear, good. Well, thanks, Rob. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to start by sort of going back to the future, as it were. When I graduated from high school, which wasn't yesterday, one of the questions on my economic history exam was this. It was plowed back profits were the lifeblood of the Industrial Revolution discussed. I didn't think that 60 years later, I'd be one of the authors of a report that was essentially addressing that same question. While in this case, the source of the profits is the fishery and the geographic context may be different, the method of generating economic and social growth and development is exactly the same. The report that the Harris Centre has just released about the coalition, and as Alastair has described, it's a diverse group of organisations with interests in the shrimp and halibut fisheries. But the focus of the report is not on fish and fishing. Rather, it's on the reinvestment of those fishery profits for the purposes of economic and social development. And the one thing that or not the one thing, but one of the things that the coalition has members have in common is that their mandate includes the reinvestment of those profits in businesses and programs for the benefit of people in their regions. Now, the ways that they've chosen to reinvest can differ quite significantly. And the purpose of our report is to illustrate how members have done this and the nature of the benefits that they have generated. The fisheries can be quite profitable. And it's in fact provided the coalition members with quite a significant amount of funding for reinvestment. And so what we have done is to take a series of case studies, and these examples illustrate how those profits have been reinvested. Some of those investments have been in the fishery, the offshore fishery as practiced here by Northern Coalition members. Some money goes into the inshore fishery, and a lot of money goes into projects which are entirely unrelated to the fishery. These include, in our case study examples of investment in air transportation, banking, clean energy projects, and support activities for other resource projects and developments, particularly mining. But in addition, money is not only invested in business for profit reasons, but also for social and cultural development purposes. And all of the coalition members have projects for their communities, including, for example, student scholarships, grants and donations to communities, community programs, and community groups. Essentially, we think of this as a good news story. It's not a particularly new one because the coalition members have been fishing in the region for the last 40 years. But it's one that's not widely known and we think deserves to be better known. And so what we hope is that the report will highlight the benefits of reinvestment as a regional development strategy, and particularly at a time when the federal government is showing new interest in Arctic and northern development. I'll stop there and we can talk about some examples later if you wish. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith Storey. So we'll go to our second Keith Watts. Within the coalition, your organization is structured differently than a typical fishing enterprise. Can you tell us more about the Torngat Fish Producers Cooperative Society?
Thank you, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. Torngat Fish Producers Cooperative was formed in 1980 by the fish plant workers and fishers on the north coast of Labrador. And we, at the same time, we received one of the initial first licenses in the offshore shrimp, which is very important to our operations. Economically funds a lot of what we do, and it's contributed in the tens of millions of dollars over the last 30 plus years. At the same time that the co-op formed, the provincial government, which ran the fish plants onshore in Northern Labrador, trying to get out of the business of it. So the co-op accepted responsibility and took over those plants as well. And at the time, we were operating in 6 North Coast communities, and now, because of various reasons, we're down to two communities where we operate Maine, where we operate and process Icelandic scallops, and also looking at other things that we possibly do in the future. In Makkovik, we operate a snow crab plant and a turbot operation. Makkovik is quite successful, and Makkovik makes money, and usually does, and Co-op makes money. All the revenues from the offshore shrimp go directly back into fisheries, into our fisheries, onshore fisheries. And in the past, we have contributed to other things outside the fishery, as was alluded to by the other two. And not so much in the present day, because the Nazi government has been formed and takes up that responsibility with regard to a lot of social aspects for the Inuit. Our co-op is predominantly Labrador Inuit people that are members. We have 500 plus members, and because Northern Labrador was developed mostly because of the fishery, fishery is very close to the heart of our people, and our existence is, very much dependent on for livelihood and income for a large part of the population. We were the largest seasonal employer, I believe, on the North Coast, and I think if we're not, we're at least second now. So it is a way of life that is enjoyed by our people, and we strive to improve through our operations, through new technology and other means in order to move forward. Anyway, with being in the north and having quotas in the north, in order to function business-wise, we've formed partnerships with Southern enterprises, Southern businesses, and they've been very, very favorable for both. And we continue to have long-term relationships with a lot of companies in the south. And with regard to our geography and operations being seasonal and access being seasonal as well, there is a need to become associated with our southern-based businesses in order to make this profitable. And like I said, it's been good for both of our partnerships. So presently, we're partnered with Mercy Seafoods in Nova Scotia, who are a very community-minded company as well, and it serves very well our purposes to be associated with them as well as theirs with us. I think I can say that for Mercy's part, but I don't wish to speak for them. Anyway, we just a quick snapshot of Conrad Fish, where we are today after 40 plus years of operation.
Thank you, Keith. Jerry, you've been around the fishery for over 40 years and seen lots, I'm sure. How do you see the industry being different in the north when you compare it to what fishery around the island of Newfoundland looks like? What do you see as the key differences?
Well, thank you, Rob. First of all, of course, I'd like to thank the organizing group for the opportunity to speak here today, and fairly with regard to reinvesting, profits back into economic and social growth in the communities. I want to talk specifically, what QC has done. Before I start, just a very brief introduction on QC itself, and then I'll go down through some of the differences and so on as I see it in the industry. But clearly, QC, of course, incorporated in 1983. It is an Inuit birthright company, wholly owned subsidiary of the QIA, Kekitani Inuit Association. It is, in fact, the profit arm of QIA. It's a very diversified company. We're involved in real estate, logistics, retail, construction, and a number of other things, of course, and a hotel in particular. And QC is a clear example of how companies in the north have reinvested their funds back into the communities and so on. We have 1.5 to 17 offshore license, as well as quotas, of course, through the NWNB itself. And it should be noted, the profits from the fisheries division clearly has been utilized by QC to grow its business. As you see today, employing between 550 to 600 Nunavut, and 75% plus being Inuit in the region. So it's a very diversified company. The fishery itself, while a great business, it's provided the profits to reinvest, but the real benefits has been from the other industries that we've created, of course. So how we're different. Of course, we are, without question, different in that we like to call it the new kids on the block. I mean, we've only been into fishery since the mid-'80s. And it's predominantly, again, different compared to Newfoundland. It's predominantly an offshore fishery. And you may say, well, why would you have offshore versus inshore? Well, if you look at the environmental conditions that we had to deal with in the north, and more specifically, with the conditions that we have to experience in Nunavut, and of course, combine that with the lack of infrastructure in the north. And if you layer it down to Nunavut, as we go further north, there are no marine facilities to offload fish and so on. So that created some major problems. So we obviously elected to go with the offshore fishery, the large factory freezer vessels. And QC certainly then invested into its large factory freezer vessel, the Saputi. That's a great use of the funds there, of course. The other thing, of course, is important. We're a little different than in the southern part, or in the Newfoundland, the island portion specifically. There's been such a lack of fisheries research in the north specifically, but we couldn't sit idly by and not do anything. So, as a matter of fact, QC and others in Nunavut have invested a significant amount of profits into research and development. We had no choice, because clearly it's been not carried through by DFO specifically. So lack of government support and so on forced us to really look at doing our own thing. The latest being, we've just constructed a very modern research vessel. It was built in 1919 and 2020 because of COVID, of course, set idle. But now it'll be in full year of operation in the north, in developing and doing the research in the inshore area in Nunavut, which very little has been done. So we invested, there's been $2.6 million invested in that vessel. Again, we're a little different than our southern neighbors in that, we've historically had very little of the adjacent resources in relation to our southern neighbors. That has changed. In 2001, Nunavut allocation holders had just 19%, or less than 19% of the overall shrimp harvested in its adjacent waters, and 27% of turbot. Today, we're pleased to say that the turbot is 80% being harvested by Nunavut companies, 100% Inuit owned, I might add, and our shrimp is up at 39%. So we have roughly about 50%. So we're pleased to see the increase as they are occurring there, of course. But and again, we've utilized a significant amount of our funds into training. In the early days, QC offered training courses itself. And these all cost, as you know, operating in North, not cheap, under $200,000 per course. But in 2005, we banded together as an industry and formed the Nunavut Fisheries and Marine Training Consortium, which is clearly any Aboriginal group today, or the federal government would look at a success story, it would be the Nunavut Fisheries and Marine Training Consortium. Since that period, and the seed money from that, I want to make it very clear, the seed money to do the training came from the industry players themselves, and in particular QC. Since 2005, there's been $50+ million invested in training, marine training in Nunavut itself. And today we've got over 300 good paying jobs in the offshore fishery primarily, as well as the inshore, of course. So, and we've also had to contend with the lack of financing. Again, if you look at some of the programs that were set up across the country, going back to the Aboriginal Fisheries Program, which started, I believe, in 1992, somewhere around there. And then, of course, the spin-offs from that being the what we call PICFI, which is the Pacific Integrated Fund, and the Atlantic Fund, the ACFI. What's ironic about that, none of it did not qualify, yet there were $2 billion made available to really First Nations around Canada. No disrespect from that perspective, it was the right thing to do, but again, none of it was left out. So since then, in the last number of years, the Canadian Northern Development Agency, or CanNor, which is much like a CO here in Atlantic Canada, been set up. They've been a great help to us in looking at, but again, only small number of dollars. And as well, the latest that's been set up, I guess, so to develop the fishery is what we call, or is what is called in general, NICFI, which is very similar to the ACFI, PICFI, but the irony of it is set up to cover all Inuit areas across the country. And over a 5-year period, get this, over a 5-year period, the total budget is only $37 million. So we have a long ways to go. I mean, there are a lot of similarities between our fisheries, a lot of differences, of course, but we, as I say, the new kids on the block, we're getting more financing, we're doing more research, we're getting more vessels, but QC itself has really reinvested its funds. And I want to clarify, and I guess emphasize this, the real benefits from the fishery has been developing the other business. The latest, the most very modern hotel that's just opened up in Iqaluit, and a number of other industries. And when you look at employing more than 500 people in Nunavut, in such a small geographic area, population-wise, and having 75% employment, you can see the benefits that's come from the fishery. And they've clearly been from the fishery. There's no question about that. So I'll leave it at that and certainly open up for any questions, whatever. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Jerry. So now for all the panelists, what do you think are some of the key lessons we need to learn from the Northern Coalition model? And Keith has studied it, and Alastair, Keith, and Jerry are living it. Who'd like to go first on that one?
I'll kick off if you like, Rob.
Okay.
Okay. I think obviously some of the lessons that have come out of this, Jerry in particular has highlighted a number of those. But just to build on that, I think one of the lessons is in terms of how important this reinvestment strategy has been for all areas and all members. If we take the Labrador case, Southern Labrador, I suspect that had it not been for reinvestment in those Southern Labrador communities, many of them wouldn't survive. I can recall a quote from Bill Romkey, Senator Bill Romkey, who described those investments as one of Labrador's greatest success stories. And the communities often talk about those investments as being the lifeblood of the community. So importance for communities has been absolutely fundamental. A second lesson I think that I've learned from this exercise is that this reinvestment strategy allows each of the organizations significant control over what they're doing. The investment funds are theirs, the choices of what they invest in are theirs. They typically look for full, or if not full, then a significant control in managing those investments. And this decision-making power is extremely important from an independence, capacity building, experience generating perspective, and as a basis for future and further growth and development. So in that sense, it's a very, very powerful learning tool. And the last point I'd make, I think, is that the strategy that they've adopted allows them to set priorities. Now, each of the businesses that they're involved in are designed to be profitable, but the businesses in many cases are not solely driven by the profit motive. In many cases, they respond to particular needs. So we have the strategic investments, the ones that help the economy to diversify and develop, the banking, the airlines, the telecommunications investments. There are significant gap-filling investments, such as construction companies, which are involved in, for example, construction of residential housing, which is a significant need in many of these Arctic and northern communities. There are employment generating strategies, and I pick on one here, the investment that a number of these Northern Coalition members have made in, or their home companies, as it were, have made in mining activities. Now, mining is not an essential activity, but it provides, in many cases, a lot of opportunities for first-time entrants to the workforce with relatively few skills to get a foot in the door, as it were. And many of these companies now employ a very significant number of workers, and they have the opportunity for more training and develop experience to move up through the ranks. And the last one I would mention is that the social and community infrastructure programs, these are not profit making, but these are absolutely fundamental to the well-being and maintenance and development of the society and culture in these regional communities. So that those are three examples of the kinds of lessons I think that we can learn from this experience. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. And of course, Keith's comments are based on the report he did about the Northern Coalition. Chris has posted the link to the Harris Centre website to that report. So anybody interested, by all means, go to the Harris Centre website, go to that link. Other panelists, Alastair, Keith Watts, Jerry, anyone want to build on some of the lessons Keith mentioned there, or really be interesting if you want to disagree, or any additional that he didn't mention that you want to highlight?
I can offer a quick comment, Rob. I think Dr. Storey's response is very comprehensive. But I think the question, what's the lesson that we've learned? I think that this is the model is appropriate for the North. It's appropriate regionally. It's appropriate culturally, and I think it's amazingly successful in many respects. I mean, these companies have really solid track records of performance, of financial probity, of proper governance, and they're very much entrepreneurial. But as I'm prone to offer the comment that they don't have entrepreneurs. They're owned by the communities. They're owned by the people throughout the region. And they are the ones who share in the benefits forward, and are the ones who make decisions and govern these respective organizations. So it's somewhat unique in the sense that all the resources in the North, and even those that are not part of the Northern Coalition, other entities in the North, are all similar in the sense that all fish resources, all commercial fish resources in the North are controlled, owned, operated for the benefit of the respective communities in the North. So it's unique in that regard, and the success, which I think the report kind of sheds a lot of light on that, I think is instructive in terms of the model and its application. Thanks.
Thanks, Alastair. Keith Watts, I think you had your hand up to jump in. Keith, I'll just mention you're a little quieter than our other three characters here, so speak up a bit when you're commenting.
Yeah, I saw that note there and I made some adjustments. So is this better or?
Yep,
or
better.
am I still low? Okay.
Yep, you're good.
I have to shout. Anyway, I'd just like to reiterate what Keith Storey alluded to. And all his points, of course, come from all of our organizations that are operating in the north. And it is very true that that if it wasn't for the offshore fishery, in this case, with regard to providing revenue for us to exist, and if it wasn't, there wouldn't be a commercial fishery on the north coast of Labrador. I wouldn't go so far to say that there wouldn't be communities, but in all likelihood, it is possible. But I am certain that we would not have a fishery on the north coast of Labrador if it wasn't for our ability to receive revenues from our work with regard to the offshore fisheries and shrimp. We're also into other species such as turbot, and inshore into other species as well as crab. So it's very, very important that and sustaining to us in order to have that revenue stream from that part of the fishery. However, we do have revenue streams from others as well, and everything we do is not entirely driven by profit. We do have the social aspect as being a co-op, but we do ensure that we make money, and with that money we will invest in other things, not necessarily what a normal for-profit business would do, I guess, but we do, and we try very hard to move forward and be successful. In our area of Atlantic Canada, we have no road access. We rely heavily on a seasonal ferry system, which is improving. It's still not as what we would like, but it's better than what we had. And hydro is very expensive. It's all diesel power, and we're very remote. Everything that we do, we have to plan ahead quite a bit. We have to operate and think about things that we are going to do before we do things, and have things in place, because it's not we just can't walk down to a supplier in Mount Pearl and pick up something that we need. So we got to have a lot of things, and we got to think ahead. We got to have a lot of parts and things on hand. So, you know, the logistics of operating in northern Canada and in Labrador in particular, with our most northerly fish plants, is challenging, but we've managed, and we've figured it out, and not to say that things won't go wrong, but they always do. And there's an art to it, and we have good employees, and we continue to do so, and we look forward to the future. So I don't know if I've added to what the question was, which was, I think, to do with the lessons learned. But the Northern Coalition has a quota in SFA 5, or Shrimp Fishing Area 5, of which we acquired during our inception in 1996, and it is very, very important to all our companies, because it is considerable amount of quota. It goes up and down with the yearly, not yearly, but of late it's been fluctuating. So it is a very important part of our overall shrimp license revenues, and it plays a big part. And we got it through the increases, and back when there were increases. So we're very appreciative of that, and we look forward to acquiring more quotas in different species. And there's been a fear, I think, going around the industry, thinking that or speaking to that we are trying to take away from our southern people and southern interests, and we're not. We just believe in adjacency. That's why we're formed, and we look for more access and equity of access to our quotas off our shore, whether it be shrimp, turbot, cod, whatever. But we feel that as Canadians, we deserve the same as any other adjacent coastlines or provinces that have upwards of 90% access. We have somewhere in the 60%, I believe. And so we strive for more access, and we've put that forward to the federal government, and we continue to do so. And we expect to be considered when it comes to new fisheries and access and of course reconciliation, which we're not certain of what exactly that entails, but we do like to think that the federal government will roll out what the plan is for reconciliation. We're not looking to take away. We just expect that if there are people that want to sell out in areas in our neck of the woods, that we'd have an option to acquire and to be able to timely be made aware of things of that nature. So that's mainly the points that I would like to make with regard to access and quotas and the future, of course.
Thank you, Keith. So I'm going to go to the audience soon. So if people have questions, please enter them in the Q&A, and
like to,
Boyan will keep track.
If I may, Rob, I think I'd like
Yeah,
to.
Jerry, please do.
I wouldn't want to be the last man out and not say anything, right? But very quickly, I'm not going to go back and rehash anything, certainly, because Alastair and the two Keiths did a very good job, I think, of talking about the lessons learned. But it is very clear that if you look at the Northern Coalition and the entities within the coalition, what they've had in common is that they had long-term vision. They had a strategic plan. That plan it wasn't only built on profit, it was built on providing some social and economic benefits back to the communities. That's what it's all about. I do want, Keith made a couple of very good points here about about the fear that's out there and so on, perhaps. But I mean, all we're talking about is a fair and equitable share of the adjacent fish resources. That's not unreasonable from anyone's perspective. I think the complicating factor here, and that needs to be addressed, and I don't think any of us disagree, those on the line or those of us on the panel here, when we talk about reconciliation, it is extremely important at some point a definition of reconciliation be made available. And certainly the federal government and DFO in particular have to come to grips with this, and that to really dissipate some of this fear that's out there, it's absolutely essential, I think, that a forum be held in which all players from all sides in the north and the south, we get together, look at what the issues are, and say, how are you going to get to a point of Indigenous reconciliation? What are the principles? What are the policies? How do you get there? What's the time frame? How do we get there? I mean, that's really what we're talking about. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. And we do have, if we need to, we can go to 1:30. So I have one more quick question. I do see a couple of questions have come in. How about on the issue of the current regulatory model that certainly the three gentlemen who have lived in the fishery for many years would know really well. Keith Storey may know a bit, I don't know. How well suited is it to organizations such as the Northern Coalition? Anyone want to jump in? We'll be succinct on this one and then get to our audience questions.
Rob, Alastair, when you think about the regulatory environment and the management environment, there's a number of dimensions to that, of course. And one of the significant ones that Jerry spoke to earlier is the issue of resource stock assessment and so on. And really, there's a serious imbalance in the north because it's actually the case. There's really only two commercial species, as we've been discussing, Greenland halibut and northern shrimp. In both cases, the actual research work, the survey work, is not done by DFO. In the case of shrimp, it's done by an alliance of industry members, all members, north and south, part of an entity called Northern Shrimp Research Foundation, that actually do the research, do the survey work. In the case of Greenland halibut, it's farmed out to Greenland using their vessel. And both of these have fulfilled certain elements of it, but there's nowhere near the level of information available in the north as there ought to be. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating on a number of levels because obviously the people in the north have a very compelling commitment to sustainability of resources and to ensuring that the opportunities are retained. So there is that element of it. The other dimension of it is that because of the lack of knowledge and the lack of research, the DFO's preponderance of management thought is to be very conservative. So sometimes that actually, and I understand that, but actually that means that there's opportunities that are forfeited because these stocks are managed very ultra conservatively. And we honestly and genuinely believe that there's an opportunity there that we could be harvesting at higher levels in a very sustainable and safe way. So we're losing that. We have a higher risk because we don't have knowledge, and we also are then forfeiting some of the economic opportunity. So that's the key issue. Other than that, I mean, the mechanisms, the models, the structure that are similar as they may exist elsewhere. There is the issues that have some comments have been made about allocation policies and so on. And I think Jerry spoke very well to that, and Keith as well, as to the desire to have better answers, better understandings, better pathways to understand how allocation decisions might be taken in the future, and what means or mechanisms might exist to improve access to adjacent resources in the north in a fashion that meets the needs, I guess, of all players in the industry. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Alastair. Any other thoughts on the regulatory model that would build on, or something different? Jerry.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rob. I mean, Alastair hit the nail on the head, as we say. It's important to point out here, from a northern, this is for all of the north, not just Nunavut, but even worse in Nunavut. I mean, the lack of research and the importance, or doesn't seem to be, it doesn't get the same importance as it does elsewhere, I guess. There's no question. Us as an industry in the north are putting considerable dollars into whether it be shrimp and or turbot research and surveys and so on. And I have to say specifically, if we look at the lost opportunities here, it's going to, because of the go slow approach by DFO and the various various other departments, but DFO specifically, this go slow approach and the precautionary approach, well, good in a sense. It is really hindering the opportunity for Nunavut in particular to get into other species. We have two species, shrimp and crab. Yet in our when we're fishing for shrimp or we're fishing with turbot, we get many other species, whether it be redfish or others. But if we do not have the research, like I can't think of the last time there was a good research redfish survey done north of Labrador. Can't think of it. And yet we know there used to be historically a significant fishery up in Nunavut for redfish in the offshore. And yet we don't have the vessels. DFO doesn't have the vessels, and yet we are hindered in our development, even with the existing two species that Nunavut has, being turbot and shrimp. Clear examples now with missing the multi-species survey, and different boats that we're using. We may have to go another 5 to 7 years, even though we know the resource is exceptionally good position with regards to turbot. The year classes are good. We still may have to go with a new time series, which takes 5 to 7 years. That's going to hinder our development. So, we have to survive, you've got to have more species than two. You've got to get into redfish, you've got to get into crab, you've got to get into all of it. Yeah, but it's expensive. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Keith,
Yeah,
want to weigh in on the regulatory issues before we get to our audience?
I would. I don't want to. Jerry's made some very good points, as well as the rest of the panel. With DFO regulatory, I find DFO be a bit paternalistic. I guess my point of view is that it appears that they are changing, I guess, but they've almost like they know what's best, but they don't necessarily know what's best on everything. it's static. There's not enough change with regard to surveys. Jerry's correct on the surveys. It all comes down to money. And the priorities are drawn within, even though there's consultations done, it's still done by DFO science. And we're restricted to very few surveys, especially in the shrimp and turbot and those areas. But in particular is shrimp. I mean, we as industry, NSRF, Northern Shrimp Research Foundation, we carry out the northern surveys, and we'll continue to do so as long as we have access to allocations to offset the cost. But DFO in these times of climate change too, and I think needs to be forward thinking in order to see that yes, these fall surveys done off Labrador, a lot of times they don't get completed 100%, and that's understandable. But do we have to live with going forward is only going to be 80% coverage in all areas and things of that nature? I mean, we're heavily reliant on science in order to determine what our tax are going forward, and we need to be able to identify that there is need for change. I mean, there needs to be time series, significant time series, as Jerry alluded to. So I don't understand why science doesn't see the need to start to change now, and maybe change the survey, add on to surveys in the fall and in other times of the year that makes it more operationally feasible. And I would like to see that. I'd like to see a movement into change. I mean, everything is changing, no doubt. And other species such as Arctic char, inshore fishery that we do, and I know Nunavut does as well. We've had an uphill battle for decades just trying to get surveys on abundance, and now we're getting things started through different affiliations with universities, Nunavut government, and Torngat Joint Fisheries Board, and pressuring DFO, because it is their responsibility. Even though there's a land claim in our area, it is their responsibility. So I find it very slow moving, and we need more and better science, and in particular in an area where we're fishing a certain species when the science is very outdated, and we have no idea, a good idea or a handle on what stock is, so that we cannot plan, we cannot even entertain growing our ability to catch or to sell. So we're stagnated because we don't want to ruin the fishery for the indigenous harvesters as well for food, you know. So regulatory DFO is improving, but I find them very slow.
Thanks, Keith. Keith Storey, anything to add on this one?
No, our report, this is beyond my pay grade, this argument. Obviously very important, but that's not the focus that we have been looking at, and I'll leave that to the experts.
Right on. Thanks, Keith. Well, I know we have a few questions in from the audience, and feel free, folks, if you have any, to add to the Q&A section or in the chat. Boyan, did you want to highlight which question we'll start with?
Sure. Jamie Snook had a question that Alastair helpfully answered online, so you can all take a look at that answer, and I provided a link to the government website. And Jamie also has another quick question for Jerry. It's very simple. What is the name of the new Iqaluit hotel?
Sorry, Arsenal Hotel. I believe there's some others on here from QC who do a much better pronunciation than myself. Peter or Harry, are you there?
John Duff can enable them to speak if we.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but we'll
or Northern Lights, I guess, would be a
okay.
Translation.
Great, thanks, Jerry. Boyan, another question.
Yes, we have three more. Richard Comerford. should the reinvestment in the fishery be given preferential treatment or priority for the income generated by the fishery?
Someone want to go first on that one?
I'm sorry, Boyan, could you repeat that, please?
Sure.
I didn't hear that very well.
Should reinvestment in the fishery be given preferential treatment or priority for the income generated by the fishery?
Okay.
If I may,
I mean, we 100% of all revenues that is generated by Torngat through Torngat Cooperative goes back into our fishery, and I think Rick knows that anyway from our discussions, but it's better answered by others like Jerry or others, I guess.
Thanks, Keith. Jerry, I think you were going to jump in.
yes, that's a great question, Rick. Thank you. I think what I would say, I mean, reinvestment of the profits from the, back into fishery and otherwise, I think it should be given a priority. And I say why it should be given a priority. And I think other sources of financing would be federally and or various programs, whether through the various regional development agencies. There is no better return on the investment and the investment that we are getting as a result of us as a group reinvesting back into the industry and back into communities and the industries and the jobs that they are creating. So I certainly feel that it should be a priority. If you look at other industries that are out there and you look at from the dollars that we have reinvested back into the economy, back into the industry, there's no other industry I don't think can compare to it as to what the Northern Coalition has done and its members.
Thanks, Jerry. Others want to jump in on this one?
Rob, I'll offer a comment. I guess I'm interpreting Rick's question to reach into the area of allocations and access. And in that context, that's a big issue, as those of us that are involved know. And the framework, the policies that have been in place and remain in place are highly flexible, highly variable, and all goes to the legislative framework, the Fisheries Act, which gives the minister unfettered authority to make decisions. And because the authority is unfettered, and because it becomes very political over time, and that tends to be what holds sway is the politics of society. And I suppose political scientists might argue that's a good way for it to be, but in the fisheries context, it's been challenging. And what really would be most valuable is having a framework that offers some degree of consistency and predictability for how decisions will be taken or how they will be prioritized. And in that respect, the performance of the northern fishery and northern fishery license holders and quota holders could be compared and contrasted with those of others, arguably, and so that the regulator is making decisions not just on political imperatives or priorities, but also in terms of economic impact and benefits to society, to the public good, as it were. So I think that opens up a huge amount of discussion that as to, and not just for the North, but it's also about should the resource management allocation framework take into consideration those kinds of performance indices and assessment frameworks, and is how I'm interpreting that. And those are my comments. So thanks.
Thanks, Alastair. I'm guessing Keith Storey wouldn't want to jump in on this one, but he's welcome if he does.
I'll leave that. It'll be very interesting, though, just as a sidebar, with the new Arctic and Northern policy approach that the federal government has developed starting 2019, in which the commercial fishery is seen as a potential growth sector. It's going to be very interesting to see how all of these elements that Alastair and Jerry and Keith are talking about get incorporated into that decision-making mix. If it's going to be useful, because we can do a lot of talking, but if there's not much action, well, we'll be back to where we've been in the past.
Thanks, Keith. Boyan, another question.
Yes, from Winston Flander. What is the status of stocks, especially shrimp and turbot? Is harvesting at current levels sustainable?
Thanks, Winston, for that. And I think Alastair may have referenced on that a bit already, but Alastair, did you want to build on that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, actually, we do, as I indicated, we do feel that these stocks are in excellent condition now. That said, you got to think about what happened with shrimp since '96. I mean, it was a 37,000 ton quota then. It went up to 177,000 almost. And now it's back to just a little bit around 70,000 tons. Highly variable. I think I'm quite comfortable in saying that none of that had anything to do with fishing. And science would agree with that. That's a place where sometimes people in the fishing industry and scientists sometimes have very different and diverse views. But as a general comment, I think there's a unanimity that these shifts are driven by environmental considerations, ecosystem considerations, and are really not related to fisheries. But when you look at the exploitation rates, they're in typically around a 15, 17% at a very high level. It gets up to 20%. But by international standards, for shrimp in particular, this is considered to be a very, very conservative exploitation rate. And of course, if the stock falls below historic levels, the exploitation rates can be down very low. And in the case of the SFA 6 now off the northeast coast of Newfoundland and southern Labrador, the exploitation rate is down to 10%. So these are ultra conservative approaches. So they're sustainable in that sense from a fisheries point of view. Whether or not the ecosystem and environment supports that and sustains it, we don't know, but that goes back to we need more science, we need better monitoring, especially as Jerry pointed out, we're in a time, and Keith rather, in terms of climate change and the shifts that are occurring, there really ought to be a much greater priority to what's happening in the north, because the degree of change in species and in climatic conditions and oceanographic conditions are even much faster in the north and more significant than they are in the more southern areas.
Thanks, Alastair. Keith Watts or Jerry, anything different you want to add? Jerry.
Yeah, well, not necessarily different, but you have to echo Alastair's comments, because by and large, the stocks are reasonably well managed, and you can't overlook, as Alastair indicated, the environmental conditions as opposed to fishing. I mean, there's tremendous change, as we're seeing in the north. We're fishing earlier, we are fishing later, to give you an idea of the environmental change. But if you look at the exploitation rate, it's important. If we look at turbot, which is extremely important to Labrador and to Nunavut in particular, and the northern members, and of course the Northern Coalition members. In fact, I mean, the exploitation rate is probably around 6% or less, whereas we know in other areas around the world it's anywhere from 12 to 15%. But we have, if you look the further north you go, and certainly from Labrador and north, we have some good natural protection that we have in a lot of cases 6 to 7 months a year, 5 to 6, 6 to 7 months, where it's covered by ice. So you have natural protection. And in the case of turbot, it certainly helped considerably, because we haven't really tested that stock to really see what it can do. Other than we know we've had some good surveys. We need consistent and long-term surveys and no breaks in surveys to make sure we manage it properly and it is sustainable. But it is my view, certainly from a Nunavut perspective, the stocks in the Nunavut area in particular, and SFA 4 and south and north for the shrimp, we've seen extremely good results from the surveys in a number of years, and that's encouraging for the future.
Thanks, Jerry. Keith Watts, did you want to jump in on this one?
Well, I don't have a lot more to add. Jerry and Alastair pretty much covered what I would have said on this, and I do believe they're sustainable. And we've been fishing shrimp for decades, and even though I'm critical on the amount of science being done, it is what we have and what we have to go by. We have seen some great fluctuations, which especially in SFA 5 in the past, where we trying to read the science and we're not certain on whether it's good or we can we can trust it. So, but I'm certain, I think it's sustainable. Canada has, you know, well-managed fisheries, even though I'm critical of the science, like I said, but it is well-managed throughout the, you know, the world and on world standards, I should say. So, no, I believe it's sustainable. I have opinions on some of the other actions of the federal government of late with regard to marine protected areas being one of the main vehicles, I guess, for lack of better words, for protection. But there are other things besides marine protected areas and blocking out large areas of the ocean on our shore so that excludes from fishing. So, you know, I know it is one, but I don't believe that marine protected areas is the only thing that we should be doing with regard to protecting our resources in the ocean.
Thanks, Keith. Boyan, another a Keith Storey. Again, I'm thinking you probably don't need to weigh in on this one. Boyan, another question.
Okay, we have 7 questions left. So I'm thinking that we might use the rest of that half hour. Next question, Barry Darby. Does this model have any application for other southern fisheries, or is it a unique northern situation?
Thanks, Boyan. And so I'll ask our panelists to be succinct and don't feel obliged to answer every question. But who would like to go to first on this one? Keith, you're looking studious and engaged.
Yes, I will. The answer to that is I don't know. That because it would seem as though it should have application. The principle is pretty basic. Other places have adopted that reinvestment strategy, other organizations, but how and where it might apply, I'm not sure. Others may have a different view on that.
Others on the panel want to venture on that one?
Yeah, I'll offer a comment. First of all, I generally agree with Dr. Storey. I mean, in terms of, I'm not aware that anyone's ever done any kind of a real deep dive or comparative analysis to look at how different models might work and what the benefits might be. And for the most part, this experience in the north is rather unique and focused in the north, but there's a few minor examples that could be looked at maybe as a comparator to explore whether or not the application of similar models has relevance. And I'm thinking about a couple in the island portion of Newfoundland and Labrador, where we have the Sabri organization in St. Anthony is a community-based organization with similar kinds of goals and modus operandi. And Fogo Island Cooperative as well also had some access to shrimp resources, and they still have a little bit, I think, left. On the south coast, Miapicat community also had some access to shrimp resources. They no longer do because it was in an area that is now closed down. But and these are relatively small, minor allocations, but they might offer insights into how those were applied in their regions and whether or not it offers a model for further future consideration.
Right on. Thanks, Alastair. And Memorial does have a Center for Social Enterprise these days. And so it could be a great topic for faculty or students to do that kind of comparative work. Jerry or Keith, if you have something you really want to add, please do. But otherwise, we'll go to the next question.
I'll just have one quick comment, Mr. Moderator. I don't think, from our perspective, we're not interested in looking at or suggesting best ways for the Southerners to run their fishery. I think that's best left to them to answer, certainly not the Northerners. The decisions that we made were based on quite different situations, based on environmental conditions and economic situations in these far north areas where things are significantly different than they are in the south.
Thanks, Jerry.
I got nothing else to add to that either. I guess I'll have to make a noise just to weigh in on it, but we were set up specific to our area of northeastern Canada and the indigenous fish companies as well. So I don't know, maybe there are parts of our structure that could be utilized in other areas. And I am familiar with Sabri and Fogle Island as well. But other than that, I haven't, like Jerry, I haven't looked at the southern-based fisheries, and I don't want to venture into dictating how anybody else would run their fishery.
Thanks, Keith. Boyan, next question.
We have two questions from Jeffrey Morris, and they are connected, so I'll read both of them. The first question: Nunavut and the North are severely lacking in marine-related infrastructure as identified in NTI's 2021 Nunavut Infrastructure Gap Analysis Report. How can industry invest in and advocate for future marine infrastructure investments for the North? And the question two that's sort of connected: is marine infrastructure an important priority by industry for Canada's blue economy strategy?
Right on. Thanks, Boyan, and thanks, Jeffrey. Who would like to go first on that one?
I'm certainly not going to go into great detail, but I mean, Jeff makes a good point. The marine infrastructure is absolutely essential for the North. If we want to grow our business and we want to develop the business and create jobs in the communities and so on in particular, I mean, you have to have somehow, and it's certainly a priority with, I would think, anyone that's involved in the industry in the North, to have more marine infrastructure. There's nowhere within, as an example, in Nunavut, to offload fish today and to transport. There are no docking facilities to allow that. There are no cold storages, and so on. There is a great opportunity there, and it's certainly something that I'm sure various northern companies would be looking at in the future.
Thanks, Jerry. Keith or Alastair? Keith.
Yeah, well, I have to echo Jerry with regard to marine infrastructure being very, very important. Our infrastructure is not up as good as what we would like it to be, and although it pales with respect to Nunavut with almost an absence of marine infrastructure. But yeah, there's room for improvement, and it does play a large part into the going forward with the blue economy. We need to have good infrastructure, not only docks, but also infrastructure within the communities to support any type of business, marine business. But with regard to getting funds for this, it's very difficult. It's always been small crafts and harbors' responsibility, but that template does not work in communities of 300 to 500 people with very limited commercial fishing vessels that would pay in order to utilize the infrastructure. So with regard to us paying more for infrastructure, I'm certain that there are things that we would look at, but as present, it is the responsibility of federal and provincial governments in everywhere else in Canada that has marine ports. I'm certain that are remote and small. But of course, we do what we need to do, but large investments into it without the assistance of federal and provincial government, I don't think will happen.
Thanks, Keith. Alastair, anything different or additional you'd want to add?
Yeah, maybe a couple of comments. First of all, I guess there's two dimensions from a fisheries point of view. It really needs to be considered in a broader context about what is the plan or the vision, the strategy for fisheries in the North, and at what level, what species, and how does the climate change issue change things in terms of the seasonality dimension of operations and so on. But the other driver, I think, in a way, the other significant factor is, again, we've talked a little bit about is climate change and the opening up of the Arctic and people's discussions about the use of the passage and and how that might become a major thoroughfare for international shipping and so on, all of which speaks to the need for a more comprehensive and fairly significant urgency, I think, with respect to looking at what the infrastructure needs, whether it's from fisheries operational point of view or from a governance perspective for Canada in terms of sovereignty, or if it's also related to the safety of operations and so on. So I think there's a need to have a more comprehensive assessment of what those needs are. And in that respect, I don't know what priority is going to be accorded to it within the federal government's Blue Economy Initiative at the moment. But I think it should be there for sure.
Thanks, Alastair. Keith Storey, anything come up in your study on this?
No, in short, no, that's, there were, I mean, Jerry will know. I mean, there's been investigations by a Kikatalik group to look at potential sites for fishing related infrastructure. But I think that's a sort of getting ducks in a row exercise rather than anything that's moving forward at the moment.
Jerry, you were going to jump in quickly there
Yeah,
again?
just certainly, just very quickly. I mean, very clearly, the federal government has to make this a priority for infrastructure in the north, regards to ports. Those that have an understanding in the north and how costly it is to do things. I first got involved in 1979 or 1980 in the Nunavut fishery in the offshore and so on. At that time, one of the first meetings I attended was a DFO and small craft arbors that identified 7 small craft arbors which they were going to construct in Nunavut in particular. And I can say I only know of one that was constructed in Pangatung in that 20 years. That cost $43 million for a small craft arbor. And yet, as we see, as Alastair indicated, the environmental conditions, we're fishing earlier, we're fishing later, more communities will be involved. You have to have, once you have the infrastructure, that fishery will grow significantly. But it has to be a priority. It has to be a strategy of the federal government, and there has to be dollars allocated to do it. It can't be done by the private sector totally. You know, just a small facility at $43 million, as an example.
Thanks, Jerry. And all? Boyan, got another question?
Yeah, quick one. What role do Greenland or Denmark play in your fisheries?
Great question. Who'd like to go first on that one?
Well,
I'll comment. It's not really very significant at all in terms of Greenland's role in the fisheries, but they're neighbors, of course. And when you look at the Davis Strait area and the lines of demarcation between Greenland and Canada, which is essentially largely Nunavut, it's an even divide. So we share resources. The fish, of course, whether it's shrimp or Greenland halibut, don't pay much attention to geographic boundaries that are established by countries. So there are common stocks, and so there's common assessment activities carried out by scientists from Canada and from Greenland. So there's collaboration there. And the other one I reference, is that because we don't have capacity to do research work in terms of the north in respect of vessels and so on, we rely on Greenland for their survey of Greenland halibut. But they're very much interrelated. And in the case of shrimp, there's a lot of migration and movement of that species across the boundaries. And a lot of it actually originates, that we fish originates off Greenland. So there's a commonality of interest there, but they don't really have any engagement in managing or controlling or regulating, influencing Canadian fisheries. But I wanted, saw a chat, Winston Finder post a supplementary question I'd like to respond to, because I may have left an erroneous impression. The survey work is not done by DFO, as I mentioned. It's done by Greenland in the case of Greenland halibut. It's done by the industry in the case of the Northern Shrimp Research Foundation work for shrimp. But all the work, all the outcomes of those surveys are used by DFO Science to do the stock assessment work. So they do have a good handle, I think, on the stocks. What they don't have a good handle on is a lot of the other oceanographic conditions, the environmental conditions, the ecosystem considerations, to the extent that they have in southern areas. And so that's where the gaps lie, and that's where there's a need for much greater work. Thanks.
Thanks, Alastair. Anyone else want to jump in on, because I know we have a couple more. Yep, Jerry?
Yeah, just very quickly. Part of the problem, of course, when you speak after Alastair, you got to realize he's been around as long or longer than I have. So he knows all the issues, but yeah, he summed them up very well. But they're not a great influence, but it's extremely important, the research that Greenland does, you know, in particular with the multi-species survey. And the other thing that's extremely important, we have to keep in mind, both these are what's called shared stocks, and specifically with regards to turbot, our OA and our OB turbot, and of course it's split 50-50 with Canada and with Greenland. In the case of our shrimp in SFA 1, and then on the Greenland side, you have their specific areas as well. So we do have shared stocks, but in the day-to-day management or anything, they're not overly involved, not involved in our fishery.
Thanks, Jerry. I think, Boyan, if you are willing, we have 9 minutes left. If there are 1 or 2 or 3 questions, I'm going to make the panelists work here. So I'm going to get Boyan to ask the last remaining questions all together. So you're going to have to pay attention. Then I'm going to go in reverse order of how we started. So I'll go with Jerry Ward, then Keith Watts, Keith Storey. I'll end with Alastair. You can answer any of the questions you feel like, or just your closing comments. Boyan, fire away.
Okay, so the first 2 questions are short. Winston Flander asks, if DFO isn't doing stock assessments, how do we know whether exploitation rates are sustainable? So that's one question. Barbara Barter asks, could you speak a little on how MPAs might affect your current models? And then we have 2 little longer questions from Jamie Snook and Sheila Downer. Jamie's question. In the inshore fishery, there are always discussions about the southern-based fleet partnerships, and it's not always framed positively. The report refers to the partnerships in this sector as strategic. Can someone speak to these partnerships? Are they working well? Can they be improved? Will the birthright corporations get their own vessels? And Sheila's question, thank you all for the presentation and discussion. I agree investments in the fisheries have been very good investments for communities going forward. Do you think priorities for investments should be inclusive of incentives for the local operations to develop new fisheries, new opportunities in the blue bioeconomy?
Thank you, Boyan, and thank you all. So Jerry, you're going first. Don't feel like you have to answer them all.
No, I'm afraid you're going to need me. I need more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, you're not going to get it. You're getting.
But anyway, you have 3 or 4 good questions here. And I'll go in reverse order. Strategic, yes, strategic partnerships are essential. And yes, all of the vessels I speak with regards to in Nunavut anyway are all 100% Inuit owned by Nunavut Inuit. No question about that. But having said that, keep in mind, you can only fish for 6 to 7 months a year, maybe 8 in the lowest southern part of Nunavut. So you need strategic partners in the south, and they work very well. Okay. With regards to MPAs, I say very clearly, the biggest threat that we have from growing our fishery in the north are MPAs, or the implementation of MPAs as they stand. There are other tools in the kit that could be used that could be much better utilized than the MPAs themselves. Okay, and we need to really take a look at that. And I'd sum it up as my summary mark as well. In the north, in Nunavut specifically, I mean, we have a changing environment. I indicated earlier, we're fishing earlier, we are fishing later. We are in fact seeing many species that have traditionally only been in the south are now migrating north. We are seeing capelin as far north as South Baffin Island. So that tells you if the capelin are moving, and maybe something is following it. Hopefully something more than seals. We haven't talked about it today, but we shouldn't forget that. I mean, they're eating something. I suspect they're eating a bit of fish. Maybe someone should tell DFO that. But in any case, this has been a very good session from our perspective specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Super succinct job. So Keith Watts, any particular questions there you want to add to what Jerry said?
Oh, well, I'd just like to add to Jerry's point on strategic partnerships, which is very important. And like you alluded to as well, that we're limited to the amount of species we have in the north. So, and our expertise in that area, and choosing the right people in the south works very well with regard to moving forward. With regard to the MPAs, I made the comment I think earlier about MPAs being somewhat seem to be at the end all and be all with regard to protection, but they're not. They're static, drawn out lines on a map that and fish have tails and swim, and it depends on what you're protecting. And I don't think that they're they take away from our areas to fish if we're not careful. If we keep going forward and advancing the political agenda to reach 50% by 2050 or whatever the last Liberal government's release was, but we're protecting a large area off Labrador and northern Canada now. And my point of view is that there needs to be a mix of other things with regards to protection, and there has to be not just not all no-take zones. I mean, there's got to be different. There's got to be a reason to protect too. I mean, we just don't protect for the sake of it. There's got to be reasons. And like I said, the MPAs are static. Fish are not. They move. So there's got to be other things within the toolkit that we utilize. The changing environment is obvious, very obvious this year, and it's going to continue, I would think. With that, there are challenges, but there's also opportunities like Jerry alluded to. I mean, southern species of fish or other species of fish that didn't normally frequent our areas are likely going to change their migratory patterns or change their areas that they frequent. And if that happens, if and when that happens, then I expect that being adjacent to these waters, that we would be able to avail of these species and utilize them as well, and get quotas and access in those areas. And seals, like Jerry alluded to as well, is always the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about seals, but I mean, they do eat a lot of all kinds of things. I mean, they're opportunistic, same as you are or I am. They're going to eat whatever's in front of them. But to ignore them and say that there's no different than what the fin fish eat with regard to shrimp or anything of that nature, it is not a good enough answer. There needs to be more targeted work done on seals, on all mammals, I guess, but seals in particular, because it is an area, the ecosystem that we have not taken advantage of, and we've reduced the amount of take. So in our history of the seal fishery, so it needs to be considered, and science needs to have a priority put onto the seals as well. I was trying very hard to write down all the questions, and I wasn't able to, and my writing is not the greatest. So I guess I too would like just to thank you for the opportunity to being able to be a part of this panel today, and it was a good experience for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Keith Storey, any last quick answer or quick comment?
Right. The only one I can have any experience with is the last question, Sheila's question, which is, if I understood it correctly, the community investments have been, reinvestments have been really important, and should they be given any kind of priority in terms of consideration for licenses, allocations, and so on and so forth? And the short answer to that is, I think, yes, there needs to be some thought given to that. Every other resource that we see in the north is subject to some form of benefits agreement should those resources be developed. Doesn't matter whether it's mining, doesn't matter whether it's offshore oil, any other kind of resource. But fishery at the moment does not seem to be covered by any consideration with respect to what benefits are generated and how those benefits are considered in any decision process. So the short answer is, if I've interpreted Sheila's question properly, is that yes, I do believe that that's an important issue to look at.
Thanks, Keith. Alastair, your cleanup. Any last items to cover quickly?
In 30 seconds or less.
Yep.
Okay, look, on Jamie's question, I mean, these partnerships that have been developed and have evolved over time in the North are really, have been critically beneficial, have been strategic, have been mutually beneficial, I should say, for the partners over time. The issue, I think, to a large extent, that he comes to in the last part of his question, I believe, has to do with how do we optimize the benefits? And the question, for instance, about, you know, should the birthright corporations own their own vessels and so on? Yes, maybe. But the way I think of it is, I think this is kind of consistent with what Keith's comments were. When resources are allocated, are they primarily for the benefit of those that are adjacent to those resources? If they are, how is that benefit best extracted? What is it? Is it taking some of the offshore revenue and using it to support inshore operations that are more labor intensive, for example? Because that works extremely well, it seems to me, for some of the Labrador operations, particularly the shrimp company. But are there? How do we evaluate and assess and optimize the outcomes? Because that's what it really got to be. I mean, it's a common property resource, and it's for the benefit of for the public. And how do we allocate and how do we make decisions about operations that produce the best outcomes for the owners, i.e. the citizenry?
Right on. Thank you, Alastair, and great way to sum up the session. And that is literally all the time we have. If you'd like to take a look at the report, please do so on the Harris Center website. There's also a one-page summary of the report available. If you'd like to rewatch this session, we'll be posting it, the link to our YouTube channel, as well as to our website. And we get lots of people in media and government and community putting the Harris Center website to use, a wealth of materials there. Thanks to the panel, superb job. Obviously, people masters of their topic. Keith Storey, Alastair O'Rielly, Keith Watts, Jerry Ward. Can't thank you enough. Thanks to the Northern Coalition for approaching the Harris Center to partner on this project. And thanks to the team, as always, Boyan First, Chris Patterson, Kathy Newhook at the Harris Center, John Duff at Conference and Event Services at the EIX. We can't wait to get our facility up at Signal Hill up and running more in person, but we do, through John, a superb job online. And thanks to all of you in the audience. We had a great attendance for today's session. Clearly lots of interest, as there should be in the fishery in this province, and really great to see an innovative model, Indigenous and locally owned. And thank you all for the great work you do all the time. So really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks a million.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Right.
Rob. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
You.